Mrs. Jarvis, you were at Queen's College at a relatively young age. I think it was 21 or so on. But what was it like for you being in that environment that was predominantly male?
It was great because they were all so chivalrous. Everybody wanted to pull out my chair.
Oh, really?
Everybody wanted to bring a book to lend me, or to the boys all came to take my books to the form room. And oh, it was very good. I didn't feel out of place at all.
What's a,
All the members of staff were all very helpful, very gentlemanly, and I had a great time.
what surprised you about Queen's College?
It was amusing because there were two smaller buildings. Now, when I taught at Queen's, it was housed in what, at the top of Brick Dam and St. Road, at what became the Ministry of Health. And there were two buildings put up for form rooms for the fourth form boys. And Miss Dolphin, Lynette Dolphin, who was in charge of the prep was over at the Girl Guide Pavilion, which was opposite the main QC building. The two of us would meet sometimes and cycle up Brick Dam to where we were going, the main building, because she left her bicycle over here, over the main building. And the boys would be on the lookout for us. Sometimes I was alone. And if I was wearing a new dress, they would start clapping. And I don't know how they realized it was new, but it was almost embarrassing because they were there clapping and cheering for the whole length of the block of Brick Dam as I rode up the street. Now, what surprised me was the fact that I never felt out of place or uncomfortable. Everybody made me feel at home. And Lynette would come over at break to have coffee with us or tea, and then go back over to the prep. And believe it or not, every master had to teach a game, and I had to teach football to the first form.
Football.
I had never played football in my life, of course. I'd played netball at Bishops and tennis and rounders. So I had to read up quickly about football, got the encyclopedia reading up about football. But of course, I would forget. And they were the little boys, Little Holder and Errol, Chung and Barrow, and all those little boys. Miss, that's a foul. And I would say, foul? And Miss, that's offside. They were teaching me, in fact, but it was amusing.
How did the skills you developed while teaching at QC prepare you for teaching at Bishops?
Oh, they prepared me very well. Because I had the honor of being there with people of outstanding ability. The deputy head was Mr. Hilary Beckles, a man of great discipline, very stern. Norman Cameron, world-renowned mathematician and writer and literary commentator and so forth. And Mr. Jansen, Clement Jansen, a lot of people. Chunilal, mathematician. And I learned a lot from them. And it taught me, I learned a lot about disciplining classes and keeping students engaged and keeping them interested so that they have no time to play around and to be indisciplined. So when I went over to Bishop's, I had had experience and guidance, and it stood me in good stead.
Mrs. Jarvis, I am sure that there are many of us listening to you here tonight and are really taken in by your sense of humor,
Mhm.
especially having experienced your seriousness while we were students at Bishop's High School. But there's something that I have wanted to ask you. I mean, there are many things I wanted to ask you over the years, but there's this one particular thing that I wanted to ask you. When you walked the hallways, one could one could see or feel the contrast in sounds, the silence in your wake, and the upcoming silence as each classroom became quiet, hearing your footsteps along the hallway. You commanded respect. What did that feel like? Were you ever amused knowing how we felt in your presence? What did that feel like knowing that you commanded so much respect from us?
I wasn't amused. I was grateful. I was because I wanted to teach you discipline,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought I was succeeding in teaching you discipline and in teaching you self-control and aiming at uh, respect for law and order because we had certain rules and young people must be taught to respect those rules. And so I was gratified
Mm-hmm.
that you did respect those rules and you knew that you should. And you knew that I expected you to. So
Mrs. Jarvis,
I'm sure that it stood you in good stead later.
yes, thank you. I am going to read some comments from the chat room and then we'll take a short break.
Mhm.
Carol Nazreen said, "Hello, so good to see you, Mrs. Jarvis." Anne said, "Mrs. Jarvis, I just realized why on one of my Saturday detentions I had to learn scriptures." Brenda, oh, Miss Dohara said, "Thank you for believing in me and for giving me that early experience of learning at Bishop's and teaching there subsequently. Your guidance and friendship have taught me to weather the storms of life." Holly said, "Chuckle." Mrs. Jarvis teaching football. Joy Franker Williams said, "What a joy to see Mrs. Jarvis again. She never ages. God bless you." Joy Franker Williams again. "Mrs. Jarvis, you never age. Wonderful to see you. God bless you always, and thank you for being such a wonderful teacher." So, Mrs. Jarvis, we'll take a short break.
Well, that's great. Oh, I'm honored by all those comments. Thank you so much for bringing them.
You're welcome.
You know, I am so happy because many of my friends now were my former students. And I think it says a lot because it shows that they appreciated the guidance, the advice, the correction, even the punishment that I meted out to them. So,
Thank you.
so it is good. It's appreciated.
Okay, let's take a short break.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
You're welcome. We are back with the lovely Mrs. Jarvis. Mrs. Jarvis, what was it like to take over as headmistress from Mrs. Lillian Jor in 1971? And what was your biggest concern about having to fill those amazing shoes?
Um, my biggest concern was that I didn't have Lillian Jore's wit. She was a very witty person. She could, you know, quip at any comment and so forth easily. And I didn't have that skill. But I had been her deputy for 10 years, from 1961 to 1971. And we had never had a misunderstanding, never. We had got on very well together. Um, I even remember her looking over, she lived on Charlotte Street, and her bedroom was on the third floor. And she would look over and see me on the Guide Pavilion grounds on Saturdays. And on Monday, she would say, "Why don't you take some rest? I saw you on Saturday and Sunday at the Girl Guide Pavilion. And instead of resting at home, you were there teaching guides and camping and all sorts of things." So um, we got on extremely well together. Uh, and we had the same values.
Mm-hmm.
I am a person of promptness and action, and I like to be careful and accurate and efficient. And those are her qualities too. And therefore, we did extremely well together.
In 1971, as the newly appointed headmistress, and on the retirement of Mrs. Lillian Jor, and I would like to read an excerpt from the 1970 and 1971 report you give. Um, and it says, a nation can only progress if its schools produce individuals with high standards of efficiency and honesty, who can accept change and adapt to it, who practice self discipline, are willing to serve, and have a sense of urgency in their approach to work. There is a crying need for citizens and these attributes in our country today. This is the task that faces us as teachers, and these are the goals towards which we must continue. Mrs. Jarvis, how much was this part of your guiding principles as a headmistress? And
All
how have
apart.
you and how have you to date been able to identify or measure its success?
Um, all of those were my values, and those were the things I thought I had to instill in the young people, motivate them, advise them, guide them. And I think that I have succeeded to a great extent because the alumni have done so well in so many aspects of life, so many careers. The education that they received at Bishop's helped them in whatever career they undertook. And this is the role of education. It underpins everything. And the values and attitudes that I expressed in that report, I think were instilled in the students because you have all done extremely well. You have all done extremely well. You have all surpassed our expectations in many cases. I said that in my 1990 speech to the reunion, I think, and everybody laughed because members of staff sometimes are a little bit despondent when we sort of see your exam papers and we read them and we mark them and so forth. But later on, well, you have caught up and you've done well. You've surpassed all expectations.
Thank you. If I may go into the chat room again, Sandy Anderson said, "Thank you, Selwyn. This is such a treat to sit at the feet of our beloved Mrs. Jarvis." Val Stevenson Ayola said, "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was in your French class. At university, my professor said she did not have to use her red pencil when marking my final paper in French." Jo-
Wonderful.
Joy S. said, "This is a marvelous portrait of a Guyanese role model. I was not a bishop student, but I'm enriched by the opportunity to actually see and appreciate the very best of our Guyanese heritage. Thank you."
Wonderful. Thank you.
Oscar Agard
I'm
in
honored by
Canada.
all that.
Oscar Agard in Canada said, "Mrs. J, Thanks for the significant role you played in the development of my daughters, Joy and Caroline, who achieved much under your influence.
Right. Good.
Salochini Jagannath said, Mrs. Jarvis, it's a pleasure to see and hear you this evening. You have been a great role model for many of us, and we thank you for your energy and dedication during our years at BHS. You look amazing. Paulette Chesney said, Paulette Chesney, parentheses Pinky, how delightful, Mrs. J. Fantastic memory. God's richest blessings. Cheryl E. Noel said, how blessed we are to have had this phenomenal woman in our lives during our formative years. Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Gail N. said, thank you for sharing a little of your personal history with us. It is indeed a privilege for which we are grateful, as it helps us to appreciate you even more. Sandy Anderson said, dear Mrs. Jarvis, special thanks for sharing and instilling your values in us. It is truly an honor for me to be able to thank you personally. You fostered an environment of excellence and respect.
Wonderful. Oh, I'm so pleased. Oh, you can't imagine how gratified I am that so many of the students have made such wonderful comments. I am proud of all of you, very proud. Proud of your achievements, proud of your attitudes, proud of your service to the communities in which you live. I'm proud.
Mrs. Jarvis, what was your vision for Bishops when you became its headmistress? And did you have enough time during your tenure to accomplish it?
I wanted bishops to be top in everything. And I think we succeeded in many aspects. We were top in our discipline, I think. And we managed to achieve special scholarships for girls because the boys had an advantage over the girls at Bishops because they had maths and physics, and it was easy to get top marks in mathematics and physics. We didn't have the teachers of maths and physics at Bishops. Our subjects were more literary, and that's a matter of opinion where the examiners are concerned. And so we couldn't get the top marks that the boys got. And so we succeeded in getting a special scholarship for girls, which was a good thing. I didn't have a long enough time. Now, there was a vacancy for the chief education officer at the ministry. And I was sent notice of that, an application asked to apply. But I did not apply because I am not a deeply political person. And I didn't want to be involved in a political situation. And the CEO is very near the political top. So I didn't apply. But when the vacancy for the deputy CEO administration came up, I did apply and I was successful. I got the job. And so many people didn't think that I should have taken that job. They wanted me to remain at Bishops until I was 55. I was already 53 by then. Mm-hmm. And I wanted another challenge, a different challenge. And so I accepted the job and went over into administration at the Ministry of Education. It was a very revealing and very interesting and very stimulating experience. And I'm glad I did go. Mm-hmm. I'm glad I did accept the challenge. And because it led on to my being appointed as Secretary General to the National Commission for UNESCO. So God had made that opening for me. And so I was glad that I had accepted it.
Talking about that appointment, at UNESCO. How did your experience as headmistress at Bishop's High School and chief chief commissioner of the Guyana Girl Guides Association prepared you for that position at UNESCO?
Well, the prime mandate of UNESCO is education. And I had had a lot of experience in education: primary school, single sex schools, co-educational schools. I had, through my deputy chief education officer administration experience, good knowledge of the schools of the country because I had had to visit schools. I used to drive myself up to the quarantine and to Esquibo to visit schools, to monitor teachers and to see what the schools were doing. And so I had a good experience of schools. Mm-hmm. As a girl guide commissioner, I had the experience of having taught informally education to the young people who were guides, because guiding is informal education. And we had a series of badges which girls worked for according to their likes and their aptitudes and their abilities. They could do storytelling, they could do writing, journalism, they could do cooking, sewing, photography, gardening, whatever. And so we had a lot of experience in the various hobbies, various careers that girls could opt for. And I had the opportunity of teaching them to care the environment, to appreciate nature. And all of those things are part of UNESCO's ideals. Education of the environment, care of the environment, education in all its forms. That's UNESCO's mandate.
I would like to angle back a little bit to your years at Bishop's. What did you enjoy most, teaching in the classroom or functioning as headmistress?
I enjoyed the classroom. I liked the classroom. But even when I was head, I had to teach. I remember Miss Campbell saying, "Oh, your load is too heavy," because as head, because we didn't have enough staff, I still had to teach. But I liked the teaching.
Mm-hmm. And the challenges you had with staffing, how did it affect the way you managed?
It did affect the management because I couldn't depend on the ministry to get staff for me. I had to depend on, word of mouth, information about wives who had come over with husbands who had got jobs in Guyana, and wives who were qualified and could perhaps come and teach. And I had to approach those wives and ask if they would come and take a job. And if I waited for the ministry, I would have been waiting for a long, long time. So I had to do a lot of recruitment of staff on my own and on word of mouth from friends. So and so's wife is here and she can teach English, or she can do history, or she can do Latin or something like that. And this is what she can do Latin or something like that. And this is what I depended on most of the time, my own recruitment, my own information. Then I would write the ministry and say, Mrs. So-and-so is able to take over the teaching of Latin.
Mrs. Jarvis, I'm only asking this next question because I know how much you believe in excellence. Apart from academic qualifications, what particular qualities you looked for in the teachers you were hiring?
Well, they had to be competent, knowledgeable in the subject. I looked for their experience in the teaching of the subject, and I looked for attention to detail and uh, the fact that they would require the highest standards from their students. This is what I looked for.
Mhm.
I didn't want people who were lackadaisical and who were laid back, whom I thought would just go through life doing as little as they possibly could. I always liked to see someone who was willing to go the extra mile. This is what I looked for.
Mrs. Jarvis, and this is a question I'm sure on the minds of many of the boys that went to Bishops. When did you first learn that Bishops High School was going to be co-educated, and what were your thoughts then?
Well, I wasn't afraid of co-education because I'd gone to a co-ed primary school. I had brothers, two elder brothers, and also um, I had taught at Queen's College. And but I knew that parents and students didn't want to be disturbed. Things were going well at both schools, and we communicated well. The heads. Um, I had taught both. What's his name? Clarence Trotz and the chap who was the CEO, and they knew me very well. And I knew that they were doing well at Queens, and I was doing well at Bishops. And so I didn't really want to be disturbed, and I knew that parents didn't want the disturbance, nor did the students. And I know that some of the boys were quite upset when they heard they had to come over to Bishops.
Oh, yes.
Maybe you were one of them,
Oh,
Selman.
definitely so.
Yes. But anyway, I think it worked out well eventually. But, even though we sort of lightly protested, President Burnham was very adamant. It had to be. But I had thought that there were only 6 single sex schools, and Barbados and some of the other islands had kept a few single sex schools, and we could have kept ours, I thought. But everything happens for the best. I like to see good in every circumstance. Whatever the circumstances, there is some good hidden away somewhere.
Very true.
And so the good has come out.
But
And
that
I'm
said,
very pleased.
Mrs. Jarvis, I can hardly imagine what an administrative, logistical, and PR nightmare it must have been for you. So tell us, if you can, how did you deal with the pushback from parents and teachers, and what was the buzz among the students?
We didn't have anybody who voluntarily wanted to move.
Ah,
They didn't want to. The parents didn't want to. The students didn't want to. And what I think Clarence was acting ahead at the time. What we had to do was go through the list, and every other student assign for transfer. If you had an older sibling in the school, then you were exempt. You could remain at the school because your parents would pick you both up at the school. But otherwise, we just went through the list and decided every other one to go. That was the only thing to do
all these years
because
I never
nobody
knew.
volunteered. Nobody volunteered.
All these years I never knew. We never knew what the selection process was. Thanks for clearing that up.
Right.
Take us back
We had to
to
find some way of doing it, and that was the only way to do it.
Mrs. Jarvis, take us back to September 1975. And we'll take a quick break after this question.
Mhm.
Take us back to September 1975 at your first co ed school assembly and give us a glimpse into your thoughts as you were about to address us.
You know, I had to have the hall extended to welcome the boys,
Oh,
and I'd had to have other, extra sanitary facilities installed. I told the ministry we didn't have the facilities to accept so many boys, and we had to have extra facilities, and we had to have an extended hall. So that's how the extension of the hall came, and it had to be done in time for the reopening of school. And so as I walked up, I was very pleased that the workmen, I had to be behind them, I had to be there all during the vacation to be behind them to see that they finished on time. And as I walked up, I was pleased. And as I saw the assembled school, of course, we had to have chairs. Prior to that, the girls sat on the floor. But with boys coming in, they couldn't do that any longer. So we had to have enough chairs to accommodate the assembled school. And we had the extended hall, the extended stage, and everything. And I felt happy that we were there on time. And I felt the grace of God there with us.
mm-hmm.
And I knew that He was with us and that He would take us through and give us success.
Thank you, Mrs. Jarvis. Before I go, if I may just read a few comments in the chat room before I take a break, sorry. Sandy Anderson said, Mrs. Jarvis, can you tell us about the decision to make bishops co-ed and how the specific boards, well, you just answered that, were selected? They seemed like the perfect fit for us at the time. Donna Sumner said, thank you, Mrs. Jarvis, for putting up with our mischievous class. We all turned out well despite it all. We appreciate the high caliber of education and the strict discipline which we now pass to ours. Don MacDonald, it is wonderful to see you and hear you, Mrs. Jarvis. Thanks for the role you played in my life and for the discipline we learned at BHS. We all did eventually appreciate that discipline and BHS values. Janice Innes, thank you, Mrs. Jarvis, for instilling your values in us as headmistress and girl guides.
Marvelous. Isn't that great? It is wonderful to have all those comments. It's wonderful. Wonderful to hear all the names of girls who have been able to write and send me greetings and comments. Thank you, girls. Thank you, everyone. It's marvelous.
Let's take a break.
Yes, I'm so gratified and proud.